Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the second and final session of the Met Opera's HD Live in Schools Opera Book Club on the autobiography of Malcolm X as told to Alex Haley. My name is Rinehart, and I'm the content manager for education at the Met Opera, and we're so excited to welcome Will Liverman and be joined by students and teachers from HD Live in Schools districts across the country. Will, thank you so much for being with us today.
Of course, happy to be here.
Called a voice for this historic moment, Grammy Award-winning baritone Will Liverman is the recipient of the 2022 Beverly Sills Artist Award from the Metropolitan Opera and is the co-creator of The Factotum, which premiered at the Lyric Opera of Chicago in 2023. Described as nothing short of extraordinary with a beaming high baritone that easily asserts, Liverman has been hailed by critics for his versatility in dramatic and comedic roles, as well as on concert stages in North America and internationally, and his dedication and vision as a composer, artist, and advisor, helping to evolve and push the performing arts industry forward. This season, as we all know, sees Liverman's return to the Met Opera in the title role of X, The Life and Times of Malcolm X, which thousands of students across the country saw live in HD this past weekend, and some might be seeing the encore next week. Liverman was previously seen on the Met stage opening its 2021-22 season in a widely celebrated breakout performance as Charles in Terence Blanchard's Fire Shall Bend My Bones, which won the 2023 Grammy Award for Best Opera Recording. So we're now in X territory. X has opened. We've done the live in HD. We're looking at closing night in 2 weeks or so. How does it feel to be at this point in the process where things are almost finished, but not quite? There's been a lot of buildup. How does it feel just to be in the moment right now?
I mean, it's a tremendous honor to make it this far, honestly, and to have done the HD, and it's a tremendous energy in the room for the HD performance, and the whole experience has been great. Working with Anthony Davis and Christopher and Tulani, like getting a chance to spend time with the creators and getting to know their vision of when they first premiered this back in '86, and just the journey that it's taken to now be on this stage and to be a part of that is a high honor. So I at this point it's I take each performance I'm just joyous to be able to share this 3 more times, and it's been really great.
I've read that your father was a history teacher.
Yeah.
And that, he would put up posters of historical figures on the wall, like Malcolm X. And I'm wondering how did your upbringing and your education sort of inform how you came into this role? And are there any sort of misconceptions or preconceptions you had about Malcolm X that you had to revisit? And how did, what did you know about Malcolm X coming into this, and how did that change after doing the role?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's, one of the daunting things in doing a role like this is, like, ever since I was a kid, I'd always learned bits and pieces of Malcolm X's story from my dad, from, revisiting Black History Month every year. And just, so I take it, it's a great amount of respect and time to study the role. But prior to, really taking a deep dive and, looking at this role, I always knew of him as a civil rights leader. Of course, I knew of just how violently he died, but I was just struck by and studying the role, just his journey, like the transformations in his life, that are so loaded and weighted, and it's such a great story for an operatic stage. He's kind of like a tragic hero, and everything that he's gone through and everything that he accomplished, coming out of prison and being reformed in the Nation of Islam, and his journey to Mecca. He's one of the most influential, people and historical figures that we have. So to take all of that and, downloading that into what this role is, and trying to find my way in embodying Malcolm X, and hopefully having the spirit of X in this opera, I think what is the challenge, because his life is so, there's so much to draw from and then take from.
Yeah, and I imagine it's tremendously difficult to play a character over so much time.
Yeah.
Because most operas are like in one day in one place, or maybe a
Right,
couple of
right.
days. I know you're in rehearsals for Romeo and Juliet right now. That takes place over a week, maybe. This takes place over 30 years
Yeah.
and goes from Michigan to Boston to New York to Mecca, back to New York. So how do you even do that on an opera stage when you're used to doing one character
Right.
in one place at one time?
It takes time, really. For me, it was just getting the role on its feet and discovering what that is, with the transitions, especially, going from scene to scene. Some of the, switches are kind of quick. So you got to kind of think, okay, now we're jumping. What are the differences, and, how I deliver something, and, the maturity, and just him going from like a young kid in Boston, and then going into the interrogation when we first hear Malcolm, and then the transformation to X, the leader, leading the Nation of Islam. So it kind of, it was a journey that I discovered in the rehearsal room and working with Robert, of how to make these transformations happen, from act to act. And actually, Anthony and Christopher talk a lot about how they wrote this opera. It's in 3 acts, and each act represents, a different name of Malcolm. You have Malcolm Little in Act 1, X, and Act 2, and then the full transformation to Malik El-Shabazz in Act 3. So it's just, kind of been a big of like building, kind of like I don't know what to describe it, but it's just like we kind of all build it together, if that makes sense, and just discovering what it is, because it can be a lot to take in, and I think, and that's one of the great things about art and being on the stage, is you discover new things as you go. And I think still, to this day, even after the HD, you find new things in the role to bring out, and new discoveries in the music that influence what the staging is. And so it's really been a tremendous journey.
And one thing that seems unique about the opera, and maybe uniquely difficult, or maybe it's to your advantage, is that you don't sing until the very end of the first act.
Yeah.
And so for the entire first act, we have, Malcolm as a child.
Yeah.
And then you're on stage for a bit, but without any speaking or singing. And then at the end of Act 1, there's that big aria. So does waiting that long to actually begin your vocal performance, does that make it easier because you have more time to rest and warm up, or is there this big anticipation that sort of gets in the way and you wish you could just start?
It's definitely different because, I'm used to roles of when you're on stage, you're singing or about to sing, there isn't much of a wait time. So it's a lot to take in. But I think the setup is so good because you see, the mother go through her kind of mad scene after, Malcolm's father, Earl Little, is murdered. And it's just like a lot that's building up from, watching little Malcolm evolve into Malcolm kind of, hustling and being on the streets. And, I'm processing a lot, and it is nerve wracking a little bit because, people are waiting to hear from Malcolm. But I kind of use all of that and just, let each scene live and sit with it, and then take, what I'm gathering and living it on the stage, and, having that come through in the interrogation aria. You want the truth, but you don't want to know. But it's definitely a different way of approaching a role that I've never done before. But I think it's very effective.
Yeah, and I remember I was there on opening night, and during your first aria, which is the end of Act 1, the house lights come up.
Yeah.
So everyone in the audience can see each other for the first time, and you can see everybody. And when this was first happening, I thought something was going wrong. I was like, this is not somebody's getting fired. This is a mistake. But that's part of the direction, right? And it's supposed to force this confrontation of the audience seeing themselves, witnessing Malcolm bear witness to his truth. Have you ever done anything like that on an opera stage where you all of a sudden see the audience that clearly?
Absolutely not. Absolutely.
And how does that affect the performance of it?
Oh, it's so different. One of the profound things, and I love working with Robert and, seeing his vision for the story, because X lived a very confrontational, like in your face type of life. So I
Mhm.
think having the lights come up, is basically kind of like an indictment, this RA, and like really seeing people like, though you can't hide, and
Mhm.
watching the story, you have to sit with this like we're sitting with it. And I thought that was just a very profound thing to do and just so different. And I'm not sure if the Met has done other pieces where the house lights come up for an aria, but for me, it just kind of, you know, made the connection points even stronger to actually, because I could really see people in
Mhm.
those first row. My eyesight isn't great, but like, I could
Mhm.
really connect on a level that's different when the house lights are down and you're kind of just singing to a massive just darkness. I
Mhm.
could really engage and feel the energy from the audience and delivering. I kind of just really all was informative and something new that I, really I found, was effective and for the moment, especially with what Malcolm is saying.
Mhm.
It's really a powerful and poignant thing.
Yeah. So we have some questions from students that I want to get to that cover lots of things about the performance and your career. I want to start with a question from Andrew in Silver Spring, Maryland, who asks, did you see the 1992 Malcolm X film? And was that an inspiration, or did you go your own way? Was that a distraction or something you could draw on? We've talked about this a lot when we talked about the hours last season. We talked a lot about,
Yeah,
with Joyce and others. Did you watch the movie? Does that help or does it hinder
yeah.
your interpretation?
For me, it helped because I think it's nice to be. I'm a big movie person anyway,
Mhm.
and I watched the movie when I was a kid. But coming back to it after I read the autobiography, having so much more perspective and context, and I love Denzel and Angela. I mean, they're fantastic actors. To still be able to just watch that and just see the whole story through that lens and in the movie helped me because with Denzel's portrayal, he really embodied Malcolm X, but he made it his own. He wasn't trying to imitate X, which is I think is impossible to do. So my takeaway from that was, okay, like how can I find my way into this story,
Mhm.
embodying X without imitating X? Because that's the thing when you're bringing real live characters to life is like trying to find that middle ground of being open and honest with your interpretation, so that comes through and it doesn't seem put on, but also you want to make sure that you're doing a service to the character and like the spirit of what they bring and the energy to that. So it was a great tool to look at and to study for the prep for this.
So this is a question from Cody in Buffalo. How long did it take you to learn the opera? And this is a question I'm also fascinated by, especially with a contemporary opera that you
Yeah,
haven't studied in conservatory coming up. What's the
yeah.
timeline for doing a new work? Or it's not a new work, but for learning a new work, especially when it's being
Hmm.
revised kind of in
Right.
real time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with all the revisions and things that were done from the Detroit production, we got our scores in August. So the moment I grabbed that
August
score,
of, August of
full score.
2023.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Yeah,
that's
yeah, yeah.
that's cutting it close.
Yeah. But as soon as I grabbed it, I immediately dove in, and yeah, it took me August to about a solid 2 months of just like constant work. I'm not talking
Mhm.
about like I'll learn a little bit today and revisit it, in a few days. Like, I mean, the score is so difficult and there's lots of, rhythmic patterns and melodic figures that just take so much repetition to get locked in. So you
Mhm.
feel good about your dramatic presentation. So a solid 2 months of lots of work at the piano, work with the coach to get it in a good place. Yeah.
Yeah, that seems like not enough time. I
No, no. And it's funny because then I had another opera that was 10 days in a madhouse. I did an opera Philly. So I was kind of prepping two new things at once and trying to juggle which line is what, and like what notes or what. It can be challenging too. Yeah.
So this is a question from Bridget in Honolulu. She wants to know, how is playing Malcolm X different than playing other characters, either fictional or historical characters? We just spoke earlier that you're already in rehearsals for Romeo and Juliet, which is coming to the Met in the spring. I believe you're playing Mercutio, is that right?
Yep. Yeah.
So Mercutio, Malcolm X, the differences are obvious, but in terms of prepping, how is that process different?
I think X is definitely the hardest thing, just because of who Malcolm X was and, just his legacy and the impact. I mean, the global impact that he's made. So many people know Malcolm X and have expectations, what he, what it should be. And, he had such a striking physicality as well, and for this production, it's interesting. It's probably funny for people to look at the poster of me like in a denim jacket, like, wait, the life and times of Malcolm X, this guy doesn't look anything like X, and in this production, it's more of an Afrofuturistic take. So, it's this idea of what Malcolm X means to the future generation. And me, Will, have been chosen to play Malcolm X and to retell the story. And, his story kind of gets downloaded into me. So again, I think it's tricky just because, it's a lot to step into, Malcolm X and who he was and just everything about his journey and where to, find that connection point in the story that we're telling. So it comes across as authentic and, but, still having the embodiment, I think was the hardest journey for me to find, on top of the music and everything else. But it's definitely, because with fictional characters, there's more of an imagination, where there is, you want to respect what the composer wants and the director, but I think it's, a lot more play to find something, a made up character. Whereas even doing like Fire Shove My Bones, reading the book, and I met Charles Blow before, the role, and it's just, there's a different type of character study that you do just to, respect the character and their journey, because it was a real life person, versus, fiction, where I feel like there's more of a collaboration and how you bring the character together, since it's, made up.
Yeah, and the comparison to Fire is apt, and I wonder if it to me, as someone who is not an opera singer or a performer in any sense, it seems like it might be easier to play someone who is still alive.
Yeah.
Than to play someone who has passed and whose family is very much involved in their legacy.
Right.
So the Shabazz family was very involved in, coming to the production, and we did lots of events with them. But you're not doing. I can imagine if someone were still living, someone like Charles Blow can say, "Have a good time."
Right.
Do what you want to do.
Yeah.
But with someone who's no longer here, but whose family is taking care of their legacy, that's actually much thornier.
Absolutely, yeah. And that was, for me, always, to keep it real, was one of the challenging and like things I kind of had some fear in, just because of the significance of Malcolm X in New York, and people that probably came to see probably knew him, that generation. So, it's like you walk into it with a lot to live up to, and it's just, for me, maintaining the story that we're telling, the Anthony Davis, Christopher Davis, and Jelani Davis X, and, finding what this story is and how the music influences the story too, because that's just a big part of it. And sitting and talking with Anthony and getting a chance to hear, his influence and on for the music, and how jazz was so important to Malcolm's life, and you see the evolution of jazz throughout the music as well. It's been I've learned a great deal. This role has stretched me beyond pretty much anything I've done in the past, and I really feel like I've been made better for it.
Yeah. One thing we like to ask is, and we had this conversation with Ryan McKinney when he was doing Joseph Desrochers in Dead Man earlier this season, which is, what can you take from this role to your other assignments? You'll be doing lots of other roles for many other opera companies. What from the X preparation process or the process of performing this opera can you sort of take with you as a sort of like kernel of something that, you know, because you may or may not do X again, but what's like something that that will stay with you that you can apply to other roles?
Man, that's a great question. Musically, I feel like nothing will be as difficult as this. So maybe coming in other roles, like, oh, this will be a breeze, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't know, the sense of like living with a role and like a scene, you know, because there's so many transformations and switches in it. So you always have to keep yourself engaged. You can't let something not be real or phony, you know, like it just has to come from an honest place because X demanded that. You know, there's nothing, you can't give anything less and have a moment where you're just, you know, oh, this is a easy part, so I'll like lay off. You know, it's just engagement from beginning to end, which I found with this piece, you know, it's just, it just demands that. So I don't know, maybe just coming into other roles with that sense of, you know, total commitment, and not that I haven't had that in the past, but it's just like a different level. I don't know. It's just, it's definitely unlocked that in me. So yeah.
So this is a question from Colorado Springs, which I think is a really great question. What can you tell people who only see Malcolm as angry and don't realize how much more he had to say? And we've worked with a lot of students recently who do have this image of Malcolm as being merely, you know, as being an emblem of violence. And so, yeah, how do we sort of address these mythologies and misconceptions?
Well, that's the thing. Well, I think starting with, I mean, if you have the time to read the autobiography, I mean, that was a great eye-opening and transformative thing for me to read. Just because, you know, I think the media had so much in the play of like turning out, making X to be this angry. But if he was angry, of course, when you think about his, you know, his life and all the things that he went through, but it was for a purpose. You know, there was a reason behind it. It wasn't just like, I'm inciting violence. Like he really was angry, but it wasn't, you know, it was for the change that was lacking that he wanted to see to make the world a better place. I think, you know, we often don't think about his full journey, you know, to Mecca, when he was able to see other people, white people, brown people, black people, all, you know, being together and of one accord, and like, you know, bringing that back and being like, you know, there is a better way. It's not about separation, but we can all, you know, live together in harmony, and it's going to take work for everyone. And, you know, I think that was the biggest sort of takeaway for me, is that Malcolm was someone who was courageous enough to keep changing his thinking. I feel like oftentimes we're all so stuck in our ways, and I don't know if social media might do this, just like this side and that side, and like, but we're not really willing to listen and to respond and to keep thinking and how we can just better our own selves. And, you know, I think that's, you know, one of the great legacies and things that, you know, was a major impact on me. You know, so it's so much more than just like, you know, the angry militant man, because that's just at the core of who he laughed a lot. He was, you know, witty and he had charm. You know, he was so well rounded in that way. When you really look into his life, you know, it's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and I think the opera does a great job at saying this is not one man who had one idea or one position.
Absolutely,
he was an active thinker and joined with others, broke with others whenever something happened that forced him to change his mind.
Absolutely, and then, you know, in this production and making him like an everyman, whereas, you know, Malcolm X lives in all of us. You know, it kind of helps break down these preconceived notions about who he was, and we can find the humanity in Malcolm X, you know, instead of these, because, you know, I feel like he generates such strong reactions, but he's human just like everyone else. You know, he admitted to the mistakes he made, and he always strived to be better, and he took action, you know, and I think there's so many things from his life that we can take away with, and it's, you know, it's really remarkable.
So this is our final question from Emma in Bangor, Maine, which is very broad, and I invite you to say as much as you would like about how you came to opera, you know, as a profession, as a performer. And I know you've also done some composing and other kinds of
Yeah.
work in the opera space. So just if you could tell us about where you started and
Yeah. I'll do the short version because it could go on and
sure.
on. But,
Yeah.
I started at this program in high school. I started in high school at this performing arts high school called the Governor School for the Arts in Norfolk,
Oh,
Virginia.
that's one of our partner schools in Virginia.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. And that's where I learned classical singing.
Mhm.
We would do fully staged operas, concerts, for all 4 years, and it wasn't a summer program. So we would go to our regular high school, hop on a bus, and then do Governor School for like 3-4 hours.
Mhm.
And I remember we took trips to the Met when I was 13, 14, and got a chance to, experience, the live theater and seeing opera in in its grandest form. And, my experience at Governor School is what led me to pursue opera. And the cool thing about it is a few of the kids that I went to, or not kids, I feel like we're old,
Mhm.
I went to Governor School with are still performing. Like I just had a fight call for Romeo and Juliet that we're doing. I'm playing Mercutio, and the guy that's playing Tybalt, Freddie Ballantyne, we were at school together.
Oh
And
wow.
like 3 or 4 people from Governor School that are in Malcolm X. So it's inspiring and so cool to think that like the high schoolers that were watching the Met Opera are now on that stage. And that's part of, and I'm so grateful because, I realized I'm standing on the shoulders of so many artists that have come before me. So to have this moment to play X, hopefully, serves as some inspiration for people that are watching us on the stage, and paving the way for the next generation. So, yeah.
Didn't Ryan Speedo Green also go to the
Oh,
Governor
and
School?
Ryan Fiedel Green, yeah, he was.
Yeah.
We were double cast in
Mhm.
as doing Zarastro my freshman year, his junior year, and then we did Figaro the next year, the English Shermer edition.
Yeah, that's great because he's going to be Charles in Fire
Yeah.
coming up this spring. So you guys have just been swapping roles for
Yeah, right. Yeah.
years. Yeah, it's funny because we talked to Kazim Abdullah last week, and somebody asked him about studying conducting, and he was like, "Yeah, you can go to grad school for conducting, but you don't need to."
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about your own. Did you go to conservatory undergrad or for grad school? Did you go that route, or did you sort of start performing and make
Yeah,
your way
I went the conservatory route for singing.
there? Okay.
For the composing that I do was something I
Mhm.
didn't go to school for. It was just I grew up, before I got into opera, gospel music was my big background and kind of like
Mhm.
musical blueprint. Um,
Mhm.
so that's where I would. I mean, we didn't use any music in church. It was all
Mhm.
like here. So I would always. I mean, I had the gift to do it. I just never felt like I had license to, until I just started kind of branching out and doing my own thing. But I did go to conservatory for undergrad and masters for singing, and then I did the young artist program at Lyric Opera of Chicago for 3 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We have to get you back to rehearsal
Yeah.
to practice some sword fighting.
Yeah.
So we wish you the best of luck with that.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
on behalf of all of our HT Live in Schools educators and students across the country, thank you so much for your time. And thank you for your performance in X, which was riveting and just amazing to see.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right.